This is the second shiur on Chanukah from Gemara Shabbos Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, and we were looking at the kinds of wicks and oils that need to be used for the menorah. And to review for a moment, the first opinion of the Gemara was Rav Huna. Rav Huna thinks that the kinds of oils and wicks that you cannot use on Shabbat, ein madlikin ben b'Chanukah, you can't use them on Chanukah, whether it's Chol, whether it's Shabbat. Bein b'Chol, bein b'Shabbat. The Gemara then explained the reason for Rav Huna. Amar Rava. Rava explained the reasons. My time with Rav Huna, what's the reason? Because it's because he holds kafta zakukla. He holds, or he assumes, that if it goes out, you have to relight it. Umutar l'shtamesh l'ora, and you're also allowed to use the oil, the light of the menorah, for your own purposes. Which means that Rava is explaining that the reason why you can't use the bad wicks and oils on the weekdays is because of kafta zakukla. Since if it goes out, you're required to relight it, we're concerned that you might not relight it. And also on Shabbat Chanukah, you need to use good wicks and oils. You can't use the bad wicks and oils because mutar l'shamesh lo'rak, because you're allowed to use the light, and therefore there's a concern that you might inadvertently adjust the lamp, tilt the dish so that the fuel draws into the wick, and you would violate Shabbat. So therefore, you can't use those bad wicks and oils on Shabbat Chanukah either. Now we're going to look at Tosfot on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph on the bottom. Dibor marchil umutar l'shtamesh l'ora. Tosfot begins v'im tomar. Tosfot is asking a question. Minale l'Rava. From where does Rava know? Desavar Rav Huna, that Rav Huna thinks demutar l'shtamesh l'ora. From where does Rava know that Rav Huna thinks that you're allowed to use the light? And that's his reason. Dilma hada amar ein malikin b'hem Shabbat. Maybe the reason why Rav Huna thinks you can't use bad wicks and oils on Shabbat Chanukah in the menorah is mishum desavar kafta zakukla, is because he thinks kafta zakukla up to Chav and Bet, v'ein yachol l'halik b'Shabbat, and you can't relight it on Shabbat. So certainly, kafta zakukla should be a reason for Shabbat as well. In other words, this reason of kafta zakukla should really be the reason for Shabbat and Chol. Since if it goes out, you have to relight it. We're concerned that you might not relight it on the weekday because you might forget. On Shabbat, you'll certainly not relight it. You're not allowed to. So therefore, you need to use the good wicks and oils to fulfill the mitzvah of Chanukah, of menorah. And this reason of mutar l'shamesh l'ora is simply not necessary. If it's not necessary, maybe it's not true. Maybe Rav Huna does not think you can use the light. How does Rava say that the reason is because of kafta zakukla, and also there's a second reason for Shabbat? Maybe there's just one reason, kafta zakukla, and mutar l'shamesh l'ora is simply not necessary, and maybe even not true. So Tosfot responds, v'yesh lomar. Tosfot answers, de'im kain, if that would be the case, lo havi tzarech le'lemeimar bein b'chol bein b'Shabbat. If that was the case, that there was one din, according to Rav Huna, that you need to use the good wicks and oils on Shabbat and Chol of Chanukah, and there was one reason, because of kafta zakukla, because we don't want it to go out, which applies to Shabbat and weekday. So then why would Rava have to explain, use the language bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbat, and specify both? Kevan dechad tamahu. Since they both have the same reason, why do we need both? Ela hava leila meimar. He should have said, ein madlikin stam. Simply that you can't light with the bad wicks and oils. Mitakamar bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbat. Since he says the words bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbat, these words, Shema Mino, we learn she'od yesh ta'am acher b'Shabbat shelo lahadlik. There must be an additional reason for Shabbat not to use those wicks and oils, levad mitam chol, aside from the reason of the weekday. V'hainu, that is shema yateh, that you might tilt the candle and violate Shabbat. V'imkein, and therefore savar umutar l'shamesh la'ora. Therefore, we can deduce that. Therefore, Rava can deduce that Rav Huna thinks that you can use that you can use a light in order to introduce a second reason for Shabbat. Okay, that concludes Tosfot's answer. Mihu, however, Rav de Ka'amar Malikin Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbat Lo Havi Matzi L'Meimar Malik Stam. Rav, who said that you can use the bad wicks and oils, you cannot Malikin Bein B'Chanukah Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbat. Rav, who says you can use the bad wicks and oils both on Chanukah and Shabbat. Rav, don't read into his extra words, Bein B'chol, Bein B'Shabbat. Lo havi matzi l'meimar malik stam. You couldn't have just said light alone. Tehava aminu, because then I would have thought dafka b'chol. Then I would have limited Rav's statement to chol. Aval b'Shabbat ein malikim. But then I might have thought that on Shabbat you can't use them shema yateh, because you might tilt the candle. Debistama lo ha'iti omer sheshum adam yachmir l'shtam. Because I would not have assumed that he thinks asur l'shamesh l'ora. I would have assumed you can use the candles, and just like the Shabbat candles have to be made of good wicks and oils, so too the menorah on Shabbat for the same exact reason. Tosfot concludes with his psak v'chein hilchata. This is the halacha. The ner Chanukah asur l'shamesh l'ora, that you cannot use the light of the menorah for your own purposes. Kirav, because of the view of Rav, Uka Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan, who agrees with that. Abaye Nami Kiblei, and Abaye also accepted this teaching. Rav Yosef Nami Mashma L'Kaman D'Sfir Le'Hachi, and additionally, we have Rabbi Yosef, who also agrees to this later on. And V'Kavta Ein Zakukla, and Kavta Ein Zakukla, D'Chulu Sevir L'Hachi. The majority view is Kafta Ein Zakukla. Rav Huna Yachidhu, because Rav Huna is the minority view in contrast to Reb Chisda and Rav. And we don't paskin like this. So therefore we paskin Asur L'Shamesh L'Ora, and we paskin Kafta Ein Zakukla.